So, the digestive system, in this section, we're going to start looking at the mouth, esophagus, and stomach. So, let's start by just thinking about the pathway food follows. It enters through the mouth, goes to the pharynx, which is located right at the back of the mouth, through the esophagus down to the stomach, then from the stomach into the small intestine, the large intestine, then into the rectum, and out through the anus. So let's start at the mouth. In the mouth, we have three pairs of salivary glands. They secrete salivary amylase, which begins the digestion of carbohydrates. Now remember, there's four biomolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So really, the only thing that we've started digestion chemically with is carbohydrates. Tonsils are located at the back of the mouth. This has lymphatic tissue and is important in fighting disease. Then we look at the mouth, which contains teeth and are primarily responsible for the mechanical breakdown of our food. The tongue is covered in taste buds and assists in the mechanical breakdown and the moving of the food around in the mouth, mixing it with saliva to make it more liquid, and it forms a bolus. This bolus is just a mass of chewed food, and that bolus is moved towards the pharynx by the tongue. Once it reaches the pharynx and the esophagus, swallowing can begin. So the pharynx is the cavity between the mouth and the esophagus and serves as a passageway for the food and air. In humans, it can be a little bit troublesome because both air and food go through the same area. The esophagus is a very long muscular tube that carries the food to the stomach. So let's start talking about swallowing. So the bolus, once the food is mashed up, mixed with some saliva, the tongue moves it towards the pharynx. At the voluntary phase, swallowing begins. This is completely your call. But once it reaches a certain point, it kicks over into the involuntary phase. Swallowing becomes a reflex at the pharynx. An epiglottis covers the voice box to make sure food is routed into the esophagus as opposed to through the trachea and into the lungs. And then peristalsis is this rhythmic contraction that moves food through the digestive tract. We have to remember there's two kinds of muscle tissue. There's skeletal muscle and there's smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle you have conscious control of. Smooth muscle you do not. So in the digestive tract, the mouth is under conscious control. So that's skeletal muscle. But once you reach the back of the pharynx, it's smooth muscle, so you don't have conscious control of this, hence the involuntary phase. So you can look at this image of swallowing here, where you can see as something enters the mouth, it's moved to the back of the throat, to that pharynx, and then you can see that rhythmic contraction occurring for the swallowing. When we start thinking about peristalsis, we can get this peristaltic wave that occurs. So as the bolus reaches this part, we have rings of muscle that contract, and this contraction moves down. At the same time, longitudinal muscles shorten the tube, and it causes that bolus to then move down the tube and into the stomach. You can see in this image how it is slowly moving down. Once this bolus reaches the stomach, we find that the stomach functions to store food, start the process of digestion of proteins. Now remember, in the mouth, we started carbohydrate digestion. Once it reaches the stomach, we switch over to protein digestion. In fact, that low pH of the stomach will stop the amylase from working on the carbohydrates anymore. So the control of the movement of chyme into the small intestine happens at the level of the stomach. Now remember, there is a sphincter here at the top of the stomach that prevents the stomach acid from going up into the esophagus. And there's another sphincter right here at the bottom of the stomach that allows food to move into the small intestine at small increments. So the stomach is a J-shaped organ. It has a very thick wall. The muscularis layer has 3 different layers of muscle, each going a different direction, and it just helps mechanical digestion. It helps with stretching and churning of the food. The mucosa layer has these deep folds called rugae, gastric pits, and then glands that secrete gastric juices. And then those sphincters that I just talked about, the cardiac sphincter at the very top of the stomach and the pyloric sphincter at the bottom of the stomach. So here we can see the anatomy a little bit better. We can see that shape to the stomach right here. We can see those 3 lines of muscles. See how some are going vertically, some are going horizontally, and some are going diagonally. You can see where that contraction, you can really change the shape of the stomach. There's a sphincter right here, which is a cardiac sphincter. We have a pyloric sphincter at the bottom, which is what's controlling the release of the chyme into the small intestine. And here you can see these gastric pits in the mucosa, which helps increase the surface area of the stomach and helps with digestion. The stomach contains a tremendous number of gastric juices. Pepsin is one of the enzymes that's in there, and it helps break down proteins. It also has hydrochloric acid that's at a pH of about 2, which activates the pepsin and also kills any bacteria. You have a mucus lining that protects the stomach, and that mucus is a really thick slime that helps prevent the hydrochloric acid and pepsin from digesting the lining of the stomach. You're aware of this if you ever vomit, because a couple of things happen. One, it makes your throat burn because of the acid. And two, you probably have noticed those long, stringy spittles of mucus that are coming up. If you don't barf, we have the stomach emptying the chyme into the small intestine after about 2 to 6 hours. That food stays in there for quite some time. Once it reaches the small intestine, we'll notice that we have a very, very long length here. So it's called the small intestine because the diameter is narrow, but the length is quite long. It can be about 18 feet long. And in the small intestine, most of the digestion is occurring. Remember, we have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. The carbohydrates we started digesting in the mouth, but only a little bit. That digestion stopped at the stomach. The stomach did help with protein digestion, but we haven't done anything with the fats. We still have a lot of biomolecules that need to be digested. So we have enzymes made by the pancreas, which help digest all of the different biomolecules. And we have bile, which is made by the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and its function is to emulsify the fat. If you've ever cleaned a pan of like bacon grease, you probably would notice that you have to have Dawn dishwashing liquid or some other soap in order to emulsify those fats. Otherwise, it's just not going to go anywhere. Emulsifying kind of means to dissolve into the water. So the gallbladder will squirt some bile in to help liquefy the fats. The function of the small intestine is to absorb digested materials. So we take these large biomolecules, proteins are broken down into their amino acids, carbohydrates are broken down into sugars, and both of those, when small enough, will go directly into the bloodstream. The lipids, however, are much harder to absorb, and so they will go, once emulsified, they will move into the lymphatic system, which then will carry those fats to the bloodstream and dump them in around the heart. The small intestine has this large surface area. So not only is it really long, it also has these villi or finger-like projections and these microvilli, which are projections on top of the villi, which are filled with capillaries and lacteals, which help with the absorption. So here you can see the length of the small intestine. You'll notice that that surface is folded. And in the folds of that intestinal wall, you will find that villus is filled with additional folds all the way down to the cellular level. So you can see, if we magnify this line right here, you can see those microvilli all along the edge. I'm sorry, here's a villus that's being magnified. And then the edge here, when magnified, you can see even more finger-like projections, which are the microvilli. So the surface area is just enormous. They're filled with capillaries that are absorbing both the proteins in the form of amino acids and the carbohydrates in the form of sugars. But you also have this lacteal, which is part of the lymphatic system right in through here. And that lacteal is what's absorbing the fats. Here you can see a better image of this. There's your long starch or a carbohydrate being broken down by enzymes all the way to the level of glucose, where it's absorbed into the bloodstream. Remember, those enzymes are made by the pancreas and secreted into the small intestine. Here's a long protein broken down by an enzyme, broken down even farther in by more enzymes to the level of amino acids, which are small enough to absorb through those villi into the capillaries and into the bloodstream. Remember, those enzymes also made by the pancreas. Here we can see those fat globules that are not soluble in water, just like bacon grease isn't soluble in water, but the bile, which is secreted by the gallbladder, helps emulsify it and make it into smaller droplets. Those smaller droplets can be acted on by an enzyme, lipase, made by the pancreas, which is then making them small enough to be absorbed, but they can't make it into the bloodstream, so they go into the lymphatic system, which has a place that it empties into the bloodstream right next to the heart. There's a whole lot of digestive enzymes, and I'm not going to make you memorize those, but I just wanted you to have some perspective. Here's carbohydrate digestion. Salivary amylase made in the mouth, pancreatic amylase made in the pancreas, maltase, lactase. Are you noticing that these are all ending in ase? And these are all made primarily by the pancreas, although the small intestine and salivary glands help make that as well. Protein digestion, pepsin, trypsin, pepsidases, and a lot of other enzymes. Trypsin is made by the pancreas, pepsidases by the small intestine. Again, working on your protein digestion. Even nucleic acids get digested. Nuclease is the main one, and that's made by the pancreas. You even have lipases to help digest fat. So there's your 4 biomolecules being digested by a number of enzymes. There's even more than what we have listed here, but I want you to understand most of these are made by the pancreas and help with that digestion, because the small intestine is the place where that digestion and absorption occurs. I'll meet you back here for the next section.